This year we're doing something a little different with our Jazz Plaza coverage. I'm Bill Tilford, of course, and along with the musicians and industry people that we'll be speaking with, I thought it would be fun to add some non-musicians that attend the festival both to enjoy and occasionally for other reasons like research. With me is Karen Dubinsky, who lives in Ontario, correct?
Correct.
And attended Jazz Plaza. We're going to get her perspectives on it, what she liked, what she did, what else she's doing there. Although she's not a musician, she has musical research connections. Karen, tell us a little about yourself and what you liked about the festival and didn't like, if there was anything.
Well, I was there, I guess, for a combination of the sheer joy of being, of getting to, go hear music literally every day, every night for 7 or however many days in a row. If that wasn't good enough, I also do have research interest in Cuban, in my case, in Cuban Canadian cultural and non-governmental ties. I'm working on a book on that topic, and a big part of those ties I am learning is are the Cuban musicians who have come to Canada over the years, as well as the Canadian musicians who have learned Cuban musical styles, who have also participated in things like the festival. So I had a work agenda as well as a pleasure agenda, and it was the first time I've gone to the festival since it stopped. I used to always go to Cuba in December when the film festival was on, and I would be able to take in the jazz festival after. I know that changed. I'm not sure how many years ago that was, but as a university professor, it's almost impossible for me to disappear in January. So I'm not teaching this term, so I was able to go this time.
What did you see at the fest this year, and what did you consider the highlights?
Yeah, you know what I noted? I was starting to think, do some writing, think about this in its entirety. And I'm not, I will say I'm not a musician, and then neither am I a musicologist. I'm actually a historian by training. So I might, I am kind of, my instinct is to look at things in terms of their social or historical context. And it seemed to me maybe not a coincidence that I was at not one, not two, but three full blown and really, large scale tributes to history's various eras of the history of Cuban music. One history of the tribute to the Buena Vista Social Club, actually a little odd, cool, but odd to hear that in its country of origin where it never left. So that was an interesting moment. The other one was the tribute to Bola de Nieve, and the other one was Rodrigo Garcia's tribute to, as he put it, the music of his parents' generation, Trova, some of the greatest hits of Trova. And I can't help but wonder if, in this moment of multiple crises that's going on in Cuba, including so many musicians leaving, is this appreciation, emphasis on Cuban musical history at the Jazz Fest. Was that deliberate? Maybe it's always like that. I don't know, but I was struck with all of them. I loved all of them. They were really, 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 really quite beautiful, and not that we need any reminding, but a really wonderful emphasis on how significant music has been in that country for so many decades, for so many centuries.
Were you able to catch any of the informal jam sessions that go on after hours? Usually after the main concerts end, there are some
Right.
things that spread out in the venues.
Well, no, no, I
Okay.
don't know. I went to a number of things at Casa de Cultura, which went on and on and on. But no, I,
Yeah,
I don't think that's what you're
yeah,
talking
those can go till 4 or 5 in the morning sometimes.
exactly.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
If you were going to say one thing to a North American who's never been regarding the festival,
Hmm.
make it two or three things if you want. What would that or those be?
Well, that's an interesting question. I suppose, I mean, the obvious one is Go. It's marvelous. It was a marvelous, marvelous experience. I can compare it to the Montreal Jazz Festival, perhaps, that I've been at more often. I live not too far from Montreal, so I go when I can. Now, granted, I've never gone for a 7 day immersion like I did this time, but it certainly is as stimulating, interesting, vibrant as any big quote unquote first world jazz festival, at least in this country. The other thing is the way in which it encourages some really interesting when they put the program together. The big main stage events are what they are, as you would expect, but the smaller events that put Cubans alongside, American church ladies from New Orleans alongside a Canadian jazz group from Alberta, who I was really interested in seeing, alongside bands from the Dominican Republic. It creates a kind of especially in the smaller stages. Don't forget the smaller stages. Maybe that's my concrete advice, because it really creates a kind of a vibe, a kind of a mixing, a kind of a mutual appreciation that the big stage events, as wonderful as they are, they're much more scripted and obviously much more in line with who's who in Cuba these days in terms of the musical world.
Yeah, and those smaller encounters, I think sometimes they take more musical risks. And
I think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
before we started this conversation, you mentioned that you had a research project going regarding Canadian and Cuban musicians. Would you like to
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you. I've been working on a book for ever, put aside for the pandemic, now picked up again, on Cuban Canadian ties in the non-governmental realm. So things like educational ties, something that I participated in myself, and cultural ties, of course, including music. So as a pandemic project, Freddie Monasterio and I, a Cuban who came to Canada to do some research, do a PhD on Cuban musical cultures. He and I started a podcast series on Cuban musicians in Canada that actually has, to our surprise, quite a long history, starting with Cuban musicians who came and got jobs in the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the national radio broadcaster, as far back as the 1940s. And since then, there's been, I don't think you would call them waves, but maybe little streams of Cuban musicians who have come to the country ever since, including a fairly sizable wave in the 1990s. Sometimes they stay in Canada. Sometimes they can continue on to the U.S. to go to places that would be more hospitable in some ways, places like Miami, and obviously places like that in the U.S. And that's had a really important impact on the Canadian music world that Freddie and I are really happy to be working on and digging out and talking to. We talked to about 40 different Cuban musicians in Canada now, Cuban-born and Canadian musicians who are playing Cuban music. So I was really thrilled to be able to see three of them, especially, who were at Jazz Plaza. Rachel Terrien, who's a Quebecois, Cuban-educated Quebecois musician, as well as, and she had a couple of spots on the program, and Nestor Rodriguez and Michelle Medrano, Cuban-born musicians who play in various bands in Montreal. So it was wonderful. It was really thrilling, actually. I've seen them play in Montreal, but I'd never seen them play in Havana before. That was also really a highlight.
How would one go about listening to these podcasts?
You would look up on any of your podcast venues of choice. We're called Cuban Serenade. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify.
Great.
Cuban Serenade. I think we've done 11 episodes now, and we're looking to do more in the future.
I'll definitely check those out myself.
Please do.
Any other thoughts?
It was also again, using, my historian's lens, I go to Cuba, like I said, I bring Canadian students there. I do research there. I've got lots of friends there. I've been going to Cuba a lot over the past 20 years or so. The most recent time, I guess, was in just last May, where I brought our student group again for them, as it turned out, for the last time. It is notable that the again, I don't have a huge basis to compare because I haven't been a lot to the jazz festival, but it it isn't suffering in the same way the country is suffering. It was like it felt like being in a bit of a bubble, and it's the country. I mean, and obviously as a foreigner, you're always in a bubble to a certain extent. Obviously, no matter how much time you spend there. But the contrast, I guess, between the beauty of the music, the vibrancy of the music, and the desperation of daily life, just of the getting one's daily bread as it gets more and more difficult is notable, and I think obviously has to come in for as part of one's appreciation of what that's about.
There's certainly a much more visible concentration of foreign cash around the jazz festival. Um,
Yeah.
that
Do you mean
undoubtedly,
like the presence of foreigners? Do you mean?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not
Yeah.
just musicians, but
Yeah.
also visitors.
In the audience.
Yeah, yeah.
For sure. For sure. And I understand. I mean, I understand why that is so, and I understand the need for things like a cash infusion. I mean, I don't actually, I'm not venturing opinions about it. I don't think, again, you've got much longer history. I don't, I don't know that foreigners were displacing Cubans. I think um, economic realities were displacing Cubans. I think the
Mm.
difficulties of transportation, the difficulties of thinking about daily life, had to have had an effect. Although I have to say, I also went to the event at the Fabrica, the New Orleans Havana event at the Fabrica a couple of nights before the festival started, and man, that was the Fabrica of old. It was crowded. It was a really young crowd. All of those young people who have left the country, I guess not all of them have, because they packed the Fabrica. I haven't seen them. I haven't seen it that full in a really long time. So that was also really something to think about when you try to put this all in a social context.
Karen, thanks a lot for your insights, and keep me abreast on how your research is going, please.
For sure, for sure. Thanks for asking me to come on the show.
Absolutely.